Hello, and welcome to the newest Chronowalkers deck tech. Today we have something a little special. This is a deck we're calling Worm Strike that was developed by the Chronowalkers. I will say largely by Eric, but I was there helping, doing testing and stuff. And then Eric took it to a pretty respectable, I would say, Swiss record this past weekend at the Compete Esports awesome circuit that they held with HCG and Jazz's Battle of Champions. So yeah, I guess to jump into it, what is this deck, Eric? What does it do?
Well, like the name implies, we're trying to abuse the synergy with the Emergent Worm and Bazin. Because you can summon all around him, really likes a certain type of summon. So we look at some of them, Emergent Worm and Chronowalker. These two summons become a lot stronger when you can summon all around you. And we can kind of show kind of the Emergent Worm's like increased awareness when you have all that space you can put around you. And then, of course, Chronowalker is already amazing with just adjacent, but like being able to do it, all around you as well gives you some pretty cool plays you can do that we will go over soon.
We've already seen players using Chronowalker just as a movement technique, right? In other with other champions, but Bazin, like the get out of jail card that is Chronowalker, having access to 8 spaces, literally double the number of spaces and diagonal movement. There's a lot more that Chronowalker does for Bazin.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and then I guess the strike part of the name, right? Warp strike. One of the issues with Emergent Worm is that you can't hit something right next to you, to the left or right.
Yes.
And so warp strike literally just covers your biggest weakness. So these two cards combined together can like hit just all around you and give you a lot of ways to attack.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing to highlight. Like the Emergent Worm here with the awesome awareness, which we've shown already, Bazin can take advantage of. It's pretty much just an attack a spell that leaves a body, right? Like it's being treated as a 6 chi, 3 damage range fire attack that can hit a stupid section of the board from depending on your positioning, and then leaves around a 3/3 body that's going to keep on doing this. And then Warp Strike is covering the one weakness you have, but then there's a bit more to that synergy as well, because Warp Strike fundamentally is a repositioning, which is then also going to change what you can hit with Emergent Worm. Like I think you can kind of imagine like if you Warp Strike someone who's coming into the pockets where you can't Emergent Worm and hit someone, you can always Warp Strike, put yourself diagonally down so that you're in a position where now Emergent Worm can hit that spot. Like it's just the synergy is right there.
Yeah, exactly. And then we also, of course, have Epiphany, right? We have Epiphany dedicated studies on top of this to try to hit those cards more consistently. And we've talked about our Axon deck building technique, so there's no different here.
Yeah, no, and then rounding it out, I guess we've got the 3 chis, which is where we've got the most diversity. So I'm seeing Kabba's here for solid late game utility, 2 mind reading, and then 1 pressure point, 3 shutdown, and 2 warp. So I guess we'll talk about warp first, because that's like Warp Strike. This is like a 3 tree, a lot of less utility of the Warp Strike, but there's some synergies here as well, right?
Yeah, because you can go Emergent Worm, warp, and then kind of get out of the way of something. So it's kind of like a build your own Chronowalker in a sense. It's a decent card. And like what you said about the 3 chis, we have a lot of variation on our 3 chis because they can do very specific things that in the right circumstance are very strong, right? Like being able to shut down a meteorite or an electro summon, which happened in my games, was huge. And then the Cabas is a free summon that you can play when you're out of resources. Mind reading is pretty good to be able to play around your opponent's hand, so you know when you can go for it, what you have to play around. It can lead to some interesting games when both players have mind reading, but that's okay. Pressure point of 1 of here can be pretty good. There's other players might have their warp strikes, there's bolt shots, stuff like that can be useful. But we do have our dedicated studies, so when we have like too many 3 chis that we don't really think we're going to be able to use, just dedicated studies, discard them. And get more Emergent Worms.
Did you want to talk a little bit about the pressure point shutdowns? Because in your prime timeline, shall we call it, in your main deck, we've got 1 pressure point, so that's dealing with techniques, and then 3 shutdowns, which is to counter cast ability.
Yes.
So what the reason for the 1-3 split there when you're starting your game one? What's with that?
Some of my biggest worries were, cards like Tsunami, which we run, is a very strong card, kills our Emergent Worms. Cards like Rope Tornado also kills Emergent Worms, and we can't really escape a Rope Tornado with a Warp Strike. Generally speaking, if it's just like a con like by himself, we really want to be able to shut down like those specific cards. Like those are my biggest worries, and then Warp Strike and the diagonal movement of Chronowalker allows us to use Shutdown and Pressure Point better than most other champions. This happened multiple times. Someone come at me from the side, try to use a big spell. I would just go Warp Strike or Chronowalker, move diagonally, and then shut down. Right? And so, yeah, and the reason there's more shutdowns and pressure points is because there's more AoEs or big spells or cast abilities than there were techniques. We do have the 2 of each in the sideboard, and I did board into them on multiple occasions when there were big spells that I really wanted to stop.
So yeah, there's I guess one of the key points to take away here is that in this deck, because like we are trying to get repeated sources of damages out of our worms, we do have something to protect. So the pressure point of the shutdown, the split leading more towards shutdown is because you want to use it to protect your board state from those big haymakers, so that you can get like one more turn cycle means the Emergent Worms are now 6 damage if you get another turn cycle out of it. Were there any cards that you tried in this deck but then eventually just got cut because they weren't doing what you wanted them to do?
Yeah, a couple of them. Like first off, I tried some called shots because they were that's 4 energy for 3 damage compared to like Warp Strikes, which is 9 aura and 5 energy. So it's a lot cheaper to play a called shot because I did have issues running out of aura or running out of cards if you play too many epiphanies. But I think I really wanted that 8 because you really want to be up in people's faces playing aggressively. So you also really need to have evasion. I also learned to play no more than 2 epiphanies. Keep it at 2 epiphanies so that you can draw a bunch of cards and still be able to play them with your resources. If you play too many epiphanies, it can backfire. Of course, that's not 100% of the time, but like I would say 90% of the time you don't want to play with.
It's like the 2 is safe as a kind of like a heuristic, and then if you want to play a third, take a quick counter your deck and see if you think it's actually going to work out. Yeah. Cool. Were there cards that you didn't expect to play, like from what we're seeing here, but that made it into the deck from testing or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at the 3 cheese, right? Like, because I knew, starting out, we wanted Epiphanies, we wanted Chronowalkers, Emergent Worms, Warp Strike, Tsunamis, Dedicated Studies. Like, those cards, like, had to be in the deck. Those were kind of the basis of the deck, and they're always just strong cards. So looking at the 3 cheese, Mind Reading was a card I wasn't really thinking of at first, and it took several iterations to put it in, but I realized that you actually, surprisingly enough, do want to play very aggressively with the deck. So you are constantly in someone's face, or at least near them, and it helps to just be able to see. And, if you draw your second one, you can always Dedicated Studies, discard it away. Then there were the pressure point shutdowns. I think I realized how, like, normally I'm a little wary of these cards because they're so restrictive. Like, most people will just kind of try to hit you from the sides or something like that, right? But your ability to Warp Strike / Chronowalker away and then get facing somebody was like so effective that I ended up putting a decent number of these cards, and they came in very handy during the games, and especially some more on the sideboard or the Forethoughts, because there's some like big spells that you really need to stop.
There is really some strong synergy here. Yeah. The priming weakness that people identify for where they should hit you to deal with the Emergent Worm is covered by the Warp Strike, and then the Warp Strike also allows you to use Pressure Point and Shutdown more consistently, more is a reactive play on someone else's turn.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, because I started out with a bunch of Cavus. I think a lot of these like heavy card draw decks like to run probably too many Cavus. I think it was like 8 or 9 or something like that. But yeah, I cut a bunch of those down for more utility cards, and I think it worked out pretty well.
I guess let's pop over to the Forethoughts next and spend a little time before we wrap this up. So yeah, as you mentioned, you've got the 2 pressure point and 2 shutdown, bringing those in, adjusting the numbers as needed. We've already kind of gone through that. So I guess there's some really interesting stuff here. I guess easiest one to talk about is our 5G slot. So we got 6 Aura Purge. So that's when you see the enemy, Dedicated Studies, and Epiphanies coming out. Anything else? I don't think there's anything else I could think it's for, but...
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. I
Yeah.
overestimated the number of Epiphany / dedicated study decks, and we had to completely rethink. I barely used them. A lot of additions in here didn't really function the way I was hoping. Aura is kind of one of them. Obviously, very strong card. Um, should be played in every Forethoughts. 6 was probably too many, and this tournament there are a lot of newer players, and maybe a lot less Epiphany decks than I was expecting. So I brought them in a couple times. I did hit somebody with it after they played dedicated studies.
Ooh.
That was probably the nastiest thing I've ever done to somebody in a card game. And but otherwise, probably went a little overboard.
Okay.
Tsunami, just as a hedge for some extra summon decks. I don't think I brought in more than one, not because I didn't want to, but because my secondary copy was the promo that came with all the champions. And I was hoping I put it under a textbook for weeks. I was hoping it would be good, but I wasn't, so I never brought it in.
Is there, just before we move on to the Forechis, which I think is where most of the discussion is going to be for the Forethoughts, Tsunami, is there an argument that perhaps your main game plan, with those Emergent Worms and that solid awareness of Bazin, is just kind of solid against summoner decks already, and perhaps you don't need the Tsunamis, and maybe you could use that to shore up other matchups? Is that maybe a thought you had?
Tsunamis are so good. Part of me wants to play more.
Okay, for the summoner matchup.
Yeah, not even just for the summoner matchups. I had that Nubia matchup at the end. Sometimes I needed 2 because I would have an army of Chronowalkers, right? So sometimes just having a bunch. It is very expensive in Aura, and this is a very Aura intensive deck, which is why Emergent Worm's so good, because it's pretty cheap, and why we're pretty limited on Chronowalkers. Even though it's so good, it's very expensive. And so I think there's no summon that's played that can survive 2 Tsunamis. So there are some times when you want that second one. That being said, yeah, you don't necessarily need it all that much, because Tsunamis will clear out the small things, damage the big things, and then you can Emergent Worm, that last big thing. But anyway, it's a good card.
Okay, so let's get on to these Forechis. So we've got 4 Dancing Stream for some life gain. What matchups are these for, I guess?
This is literally just for Idris Blitz. I brought him in against her. It was round 5. It was my first loss of the tournament. We gained 2. I won 1 in 3. I brought them in. I had them in my hands. I didn't really need them, or I should say, the one game I lost, I needed my second one, and I would have won. But that's literally it. I think it's just it's just there for that one last turn. All she's doing is fireballing you, and you've got board control. You're running away from her. She's running away from all your summons, and she's just hoping she can kind of eke it out, survive that last 2 turns to kind of kill you, and then this just gives you that one extra turn, and that's literally it.
Then Deceit, I guess, in Foreboding 2 cents. So first of all, Deceit. What is Deceit for?
Yeah, Deceit is, I would say, a pseudo counterspell, in that it's kind of countering, ideally an Aura Purge or something like that. The idea is that you play your Epiphany, they go Aura Purge, you go Deceit, draw 3 cards, right? And that's the main concept of it. But it could just be kind of a cheap way, in Chi, to get your card to go. It's one additional Warp Strike, one additional Emergent Worm. If they try to do something, it gives you that extra little bit of interaction at a lower chi and a lower cost.
Because I will say this deck is pretty resilient already to Aura Purge, since if you got 2 Emergent Worms, you're safe from an Aura Purge, right? Yeah. You can safely go for that dedicated.
Yeah. And I guess that's something to mention, is I brought this deck because it was a Epiphany dedicated study deck that wasn't cold to Aura Purge. Because you you said, Emergent Worm can kill the Aura Purge in response, but still with the Epiphany on the stack, Chronowalker away after the Aura Purge lands. It'll be an expensive Chronowalker, but you can do that. You can Warp Strike or Warp away if there's something in range, or you Deceit. So that was why I considered this deck. One thing I would be having Nullifies. Main reason is that I've got no way of countering Chronowalker, and that was a huge issue in that last game against Nubia. Yeah, basically, my idea was having either shut down a pressure point to stop movement abilities, but neither of those stop a Chronowalker, so they could always kind of get away
And then foreboding tombstones. This is our last one. Is this for the Kun matchup?
Yeah, basically. I never brought it in, never played Con. It's for Con and Iblis. Basically, anyone with an action speed attack that can't move off of it and hit it.
Tashir?
Oh yeah, it's Tashir as well. That's true.
Cool.
I didn't play any of them, so I never brought them in. But yeah, that was the idea.
Cool. All right, so yeah, that's I guess the deck tech for Worm Strike. Hope everyone enjoys trying this one out. I will say it's a very, very fun deck to play because you're a summoner deck, but you get to do lots of double move pass and then just do stuff in a very interactive space. Which is, I mean, I love interaction. I don't know how Eric feels, but
well, I built this deck, so
yeah. All right, cool.
And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.